Matt here from Somefishaquariums, talking about CO2 today in episode 5 of my series, Beginner to Pro, Fast. Talking about planted tanks, and if you want to stop killing plants and spending money on equipment that doesn't work, watch all of my series and make sure you subscribe so that you see all of the tricks to keeping plants alive and growing plants like a pro. If you don't subscribe, YouTube might just completely lose you in the suggestions and you'll never see my videos again. So please subscribe if you want to see more and stop wasting money and time trying to grow plants that just keep dying. Alright, in my series, we tell you just what you need to know. Alright, so let's get into it. With CO2, there's two things you need to know. First is all the different options of how to get CO2 into the tank. So we'll discuss that into detail. And then we'll tell you my favorite option there. And then the second thing you need to know about CO2 is how much CO2 do you need, when do you turn your CO2 on and off, and adjusting it. How much do you ever want to adjust it? So we'll get into that into detail. All right, so the first thing is how to get CO2 into your tank. So we'll pull up the chart now and we'll see you've got 4 different options. The first one is that DIY yeast. So this could be a messy option, but it does work. You kind of have to redo it every week, and I think it's just a little too hard to stay on top of. It's too easy for this mixture to run out of gas, and then you are stuck with no CO2 or very unstable CO2. And we talk about that later in the second part, but it does work, but it's a little too unstable in my opinion for pro. Okay, moving on. You could run no CO2, but your plant growth is not going to be the greatest. Depending on what you're doing, this could work, but long term, you're probably going to end up with algae issues. So if you want to go pro, we don't recommend doing a no CO2 tank, even though there's a lot of tanks that do look nice. The one behind me has no CO2 injected at all. So you can see that some plants do grow. It needs a trimming and stuff, but you can see from the tank behind me that plants grow okay sometimes without CO2 if you know what you're doing. But if we're going to consider pro, where you're growing 95% of the plants on the market and you're not killing them and you're reproducing them, you're doubling them every month or faster, this is the kind of growth that we want, and so we don't recommend a no CO2 tank. Another option is that baking soda. So these kits allow you to pressurize from mixing baking soda and vinegar, I believe. And this creates a pressure, and then if it comes with the kit with the regulator, it's basically pressurized CO2. The only thing is this can run out, and it's a little bit tedious to do the mixture right, and when this runs out, then you're out of gas again. So we don't recommend this because it could be unstable, and it's extra time for maintenance, things like that, because it's probably going to last maybe about a week or so, and then you'll be redoing your mix. All right, the final option is the pressurized CO2. So for pressurized CO2, you can go to welding supplies or brewery supply places that will refill or exchange your CO2 tank. And once you hook up your CO2 tank and your regulator and your solenoid, then you're going to have a diffuser for putting that into the tank. Or if you don't have a CO2 diffuser, you might have like a reactor. You might be intimidated by all of the different equipment that come with the CO2 tank, but it's really simple. If you get yourself a kit, I'll leave one in the description where you can just go to Amazon and get your kit. And once you hook it up, it's very simple. And your CO2 tank, depending on the size of your tank, like I run a 20-gallon with CO2. I have a 10-pound CO2 tank that runs for about 6 months without needing a refill. So, and I blast CO2. I'm running a light green drop checker, and it's blasted with CO2. So that just for kind of price comparison in exchange on a CO2 tank. So when I run out and I have to go refill, that's about $40 right now. The price can vary sometimes, but about $40 for a 10-pound tank. Lasts about 6 months. So just give you an idea of the price. All right, so let's talk about diffusers and reactors. Any diffuser would work just fine for any tank. Those little ceramic disc diffusers, those are fine. I find if they're made of glass, I always break those. So I don't recommend those. If you're running a canister filter, you can get a reactor, which is like a little tube. I'll show some B-roll, but it's a little tube that hooks up to the inlet of your canister filter, and the CO2 goes into the canister filter as it's getting filtered, and it mixes with the water real good, and then as it comes out of the canister filter and out the outflow, then all that CO2 is already in that water coming into the tank, and that's a really good thing. And it's a little bit cleaner of a look aesthetically because you don't have like that ceramic disc with all the bubbles coming out of it. Some people like that. I think it's a cool look. So either way, you can try a glass diffuser with the ceramic disc, and if that works for you, great. If you have a canister, I recommend go ahead and get a reactor, and then you'll be just fine. There's other things out on the market like atomizers and things like that, but they're not necessary and they're kind of expensive. So you could do DIY options, but I do not recommend those. It's just we just want to stick to just what we need. And a reactor with a canister filter is great, or if you don't have a canister filter, just a regular diffuser is just great too. All right, let's talk about our second thing. How much CO2 do you need, and when do you turn the CO2 on? All right, so how much CO2 is an interesting equation because it changes based on your tank, right? So if you have a bigger tank, it's going to be more. If you have a smaller tank, it's less. So the rule of thumb for how much CO2 is to get yourself a drop checker. Hopefully I have some B-roll of that, but a little drop checker. You put this fluid in there, and it'll change from kind of a blue color to a green color, and if you put too much CO2, it'll be yellow. So I like to run a light green drop checker. All right. Then for when do you have the CO2 on? So as a rule of thumb, you want to get yourself a solenoid that goes on the regulator. All right. And this allows you to turn the CO2 on and off automatically. And you can put this on a timer, a solenoid timer. And what you want to do is set the CO2 so that it comes on an hour before your lights go on, and then it turns off an hour before your lights turn off, right? So it's getting that water ready for that plant growth when that light turns on. So there's a lot of CO2 in the water when the lights turn on. And then once the lights turn off, the plants don't need CO2. So you can turn the CO2 off an hour before the lights go off, and they'll use up the CO2 that's in the water. And then when the lights turn off, the plants will kind of stop growing, and that they don't need the CO2 when the lights are off. So you might as well just turn it off. You'll save a bunch of CO2. So just as a quick example, if you turn your lights on from 12 to 8, so like noon to 8, you would put your CO2 on from 11 to 7. All right, the final thing we're going to talk about is the CO2 stability. So you want to make sure that your CO2 doesn't change too much from day to day, right? So you're injecting about the same amount every single day. You want that light green drop checker. Just keep it like that. If something changes or when you do your refill, try to get it set as similar to how you did it before the refill. Keep that CO2 stable, because if you have a drop in CO2 or if you increase your CO2, either way, the plants are going to be forced into adaptation, right? So they're gonna be in different water conditions, and they're going to throw out new leaves for whatever that new condition is, if they can adapt to that new condition. With that plant adaptation, they throw out the new leaves, and the old leaves usually die off, and you don't want that. And then your new growth will be stunted, or might just not be able to grow. All right, quick recap here is that for photosynthesis, plants need that light and they need CO2. So that's why we talk about CO2 in general. So you need to make sure that you have some source of CO2 in your tank. If you don't use one of the options for injecting CO2 into your tank, there are some sources of small amounts of CO2 in your tank. So sometimes if you have a heavy fish load, as the fish respire, so they're breathing, they do create CO2. And there's microorganisms in the soil that can create some CO2. But these levels are going to be dramatically lower than if you had some kind of injected CO2. So to recap, we recommend using a pressurized CO2, like from a CO2 tank. That's going to be your pro level recommendation. You want to keep your drop checker at light green. You want your CO2 on an hour before the lights come on, and to turn it off an hour before the lights go off. And then you want to just keep your CO2 nice and stable so that your plants don't go into adaptation. They just have a nice environment where they're very used to that water staying about the same. So that's all you need to know about CO2. So if you think I missed anything, go ahead and drop it in the comments. That'd be great for my community. If you know anyone that would also like to know more about the CO2, go ahead and share this video with them. Or if you think my series is great, go ahead and share the series with them. Also, for yourself or for my channel, go ahead and like and subscribe it so that you see all of my videos. Go ahead and go to the playlist, watch the other videos in the series, or go ahead and click the buttons that come up at the end screen here. And thank you for watching, and have a great day.